Welcome to Lincoln Log, where we speak with leading historians and other officials about their stories, research, and wisdom. Expand your knowledge and indulge your curiosity here on Lincoln Log. This podcast is produced by the Abraham Lincoln Association, aiding and promoting Abraham Lincoln's life and legacy. Founded in 1908, the ALA remains the nation's oldest and largest Lincoln organization. Learn more at abrahamlincolnassociation.org. Greetings. I am your host, Joshua Claiborne, and I am pleased to welcome Dick Hart to our Lincoln Log podcast. Dick is an attorney and historian in Springfield, Illinois. For decades, Hart has been a recognized leader in Springfield's historic preservation movement and led efforts to save the Elijah Iles House and restore it to serve as a museum. Hart published several studies of Lincoln Springfield and is past president of the Abraham Lincoln Association. Dick, thank you for joining the podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
I view you as one of the unsung heroes in Lincoln scholarship because you are continually churning out original research. Not just some of these biographies that stand on the shoulders of prior giants, but one of those giants who really does the hard work of providing us with original scholarship, particularly on Springfield and the surrounding area. The Spring Creek series focused initially on the city's Black community, but has really grown to address many areas of Springfield and the area. Could you summarize that research and your motivation for it?
Well, thank you very much, Josh. It's as a lawyer and one who doesn't play golf, so I have I have a lot of free time, and so my free time I've spent on my love, which is local history. And in looking at local history, you look at the minutia, the little pieces of fact that make up a story, and are can tell a larger story when it's all put together. And so, as far as the my interest in African American history, which had been totally neglected in Springfield, there had been nothing written about it really. And I recall a Sangamon County historical meeting one evening when the president, Carroll Hall, said something to me about, well, Dick, you know, there is a huge amount of information that's never been revealed about the African American history of early Springfield. And I said, what? What are you saying? And so he kind of prompted my interest. And so from that point, and thank goodness for the internet and the ability to use that internet to acquire information, I would be doing research and I'd run across some information about African Americans in Springfield. So I would kind of put that in a pile, and the pile got larger and larger and larger. And finally, it spoke to me and it said, there is so much information here that has not been disclosed that it's worthy of being shared. And so that's kind of how it started. And the search, I guess, lasted over probably 10 or 15 years of just accumulating material and then putting it in what I guess is maybe a very lawyerly fashion. I try not to give opinions or try not to sway people other than with facts.
Right.
And the facts that I have are facts from census data, from newspaper reports at the time, and from other contemporary resources of letters or people's memoirs or whatever. And when I put this together in a chronological order, and it just kept growing and growing, it's absolutely floored me as to the presence of African Americans in Lincoln Springfield and the total impact that had on the environment of Springfield, which was Lincoln's environment.
Right.
And it had been totally ignored. It had just never been even acknowledged, other than Billy the Barber, Floraville, who was Lincoln's barber. And I called him kind of the token African American in Lincoln Springfield, but he was just one of so many that had close contacts with Lincoln. The classic one is Jameson Jenkins, who was a conductor on the Underground Railroad and lived a half a block south of the Lincolns. And Jenkins was a friend of Abraham Lincoln's, and he was running an underground railroad, which obviously Lincoln knew about. And and there'd never been anything spoken about this before. So I hope that maybe gives you an idea of how it started and how I accumulated this information.
Yeah, just to give our listeners a better sense of the scope of your work, the Spring Creek series alone provides, by my count, over 28 publications. Most of it, like we talked about, original source material, which is just really remarkable. Why do you see that as so important, and how do you hope that influences future historians?
Well, again, I'm driven by my professional career, which is as a lawyer and looking at facts and accumulating facts and putting them in some logical order so that they tell a story, which is like writing a brief for an appellate court. And so that's what I think has driven me. And then I'm just so curious about the little people in Springfield who participated in the daily life of the community in some way or another, whether they were a hotel keeper, whether they were a drayman, a person that had a cart that went around hauling things for people, whether they were a photographer. I've done a book on the photographers of Springfield, but it's the minutia. Circuses. I did one on circuses, which was kind of tongue in cheek when I started out. The circuses of Lincoln Springfield. But when I finished, it was unbelievable how many circuses had come through town and how Lincoln absolutely loved the circuses. And he would take kids to the circuses from the neighborhood. He'd gather them up and take them to the circuses. So it's the minutia, I think, of that. But to me, the minutia is so important. It is so important. And it's so accessible if you look. And I don't mean to demean or to put down any historians, but so many glaze over the digging part of history.
Or they just repackage what's already out there.
Yes, and just repackage it and put it up as a new thought or a new way of thinking about things. But there's really nothing added.
Right.
And so I've tried to avoid that. And one of my best friends, Michael Burlingame, and we've been friends for years. And when he was writing the magnum opus, he would come to Springfield and stay with us. And so we've been friends forever. But we couldn't differ more on some of our opinions about Lincoln, and in particular, Thomas Lincoln. I'm just a great, great fan of Thomas Lincoln as a man, standing alone, not putting him in terms of, oh, he was the father of Abraham Lincoln, so let's try to figure out if he was a good or a bad father. I looked at him as a man and as a person who was involved in his community. And
I'm glad you brought him up, because I definitely wanted to address him. You've been a major supporter of Thomas Lincoln, Abraham's father of the year. As we know, you mentioned not just Michael Burlingame, but really many other historians have really viewed him in a negative light, calling him shiftless, mean, or discouraging his intellectual growth. You're one of the more outspoken Thomas Lincoln defenders, and I tend to agree with you. So could you expound on why you believe Thomas Lincoln was such a positive, or at least not so much of a negative influence as other people seem to suggest?
Sure. And again, I think my basis for my analysis goes back again to this: look at the facts. Don't go and look at what somebody said to Herndon 60 years after the event. And I mean, Herndon's fine, but look at the facts. Let's go to the census data. Let's go to the minutes of the churches that he belonged to. Let's look at his furniture that he created. That is his collected works, as the furniture that he made. And let's look at the fact that he served on juries. And let's look at the fact that he was considered in his church to be a very valuable contributor to the church, helping build the church that he lived in. He was on the frontier of American civilization. Without Thomas Lincoln and his ilk, there would be no Western frontier. And they brought the very basic elements of Western civilization to the frontier and established it here in a way that they should be very proud of. And to negate that with what I call really kind of oh, uh, inappropriate analysis of his appearance or his um, his ability to do things, I think was started with the Scripps story that was put out for the election of Abraham Lincoln. And that Scripps story had to elevate Abraham Lincoln to the position of being almost a god. And to do that, you put his father down as far as you possibly could, because that made the son look better.
Right.
But when you look at Thomas Lincoln as a man and look at what he did and the family that he raised, the education that he tried to get for his family, every opportunity there was on the Western frontier where they lived, where there was a subscription school of any kind, his kids went to school.
Mm-hmm.
And that may have not have been the finest education in the world, but I think even David Donald said, my gosh, if that's the education it took to make an Abraham Lincoln, let's have more of it, But Thomas Lincoln was a man of his time. He was a man of his place. And he was among his peers. He was considered to be an honorable man and one who had contributed greatly to his community. And I think that he's really just been put down in ways without people looking at the real facts of what his environment was.
My sense is there's a slow shift towards your view. Maybe I'm wrong and I'm seeing what I want to see, but I'm starting to see that shift. And I really think you're a big part of that. You've really carried the water a lot on rehabilitating Thomas Lincoln's, reputation.
Well, thank you. I hope so. It's one of my fervent beliefs about Thomas Lincoln and Michael, who's as I say, one of my best friends. And we go round and round over it. And I say, well, you're wrong. He says, oh, you're wrong. And the title of one of his chapters is "Once I Was a Slave."
Yeah.
And, come on. The fact that Thomas Lincoln had his son working in the farm, a subsistence farm, not even an agricultural farm like we would think of today, but a subsistence farm, like thousands and thousands of other children did who lived on the farms of their parents on the frontier. Everybody did. And even today, if you know any farm families,
right?
Because I represented a lot of farm families in Central Illinois, and the kids work. And that's part of the life of being a farm person. Right. And to say that is somehow degrading and taking advantage of this person and making them a quote slave, I think is just way, way over the top.
Well, I'll tell you, Michael was a guest on this podcast early on, and I asked him about Thomas and pushed him a little bit. And, I got the sense I don't know if he would characterize it as relenting or changing his view, but that was certainly my impression, that he was warming up to Thomas Lincoln. And I think
I'm happy to hear you say that, because I have the same impression. I think he has warmed up a little bit, but it's amazing to me, and I don't want to again refer to any particular person, but when I went through and looked at Thomas Lincoln, I looked at the 1810 census of Hardin County, which tells a great story. Mm-hmm. It tells so many stories, that census does. It tells the story of African-American presence in Hardin County, which was huge. The number of slaves there were in Hardin County and in proximity to where the Lincolns lived. Mm-hmm. The number of Catholics that were in close proximity in Bardstown and in the area where the Lincolns lived on Knob Creek. Zachariah Riney, the first teacher of Abraham Lincoln, was a Catholic, staunch Catholic. Yeah. And there's just so many elements of that environment that have not been addressed. They just haven't been. They just, it's like, oh, well, it was the frontier and everybody lived in a log cabin and they, worked in the fields and they were ignorant and they went to church on Sundays and that's about all you can say about it. Well, there's a heck of a lot more to be said.
Right. Well, I mentioned your output with the Spring Creek series, over 28 publications. Just like I said, remarkable. What is the secret to your productive output? or you suggest you don't golf. But I think your output for original research is uh, unparalleled, or at least matches what I see from others. What's your method for researching and writing?
Well, there's no method in the madness, I guess, but I use the internet. I just feel blessed that I was born at a time when I could still learn to use the internet. I wasn't too old, and that the internet has just been exploding with information that's available that hasn't been in the past. And so that's the primary method, is using the internet and all the resources that are available. And then to have two or three things going at once. So it seems like I've always got two or three, quote, books going at the same time, and I'll work on one for a while, and then I'll shift and go to another one and work on it for a while, and then back and forth. And so, for instance, right now I'm working on three. One is the Germans in Lincoln, Springfield. The German community was huge in Springfield, and the proximity of the Germans to the Lincoln home and their interaction with Lincoln. And that's another aspect of the ethnicity of Springfield at the time Lincoln was there. That's not really been picked up by historians. Another one is on the Catholic presence in Hardin County, Kentucky, which I had never known about.
Yeah.
And I have delved into it, and I mean, it just blows my mind what was happening in close proximity to where the Lincolns lived on Knob Creek, and what was happening at Bardstown and in the surrounding area with the Catholics that came down from Maryland in various groups in the late 1790s and 80s. And then I'm working on one called Thomas Lincoln's World, the People. And it's kind of a encyclopedia of just people, the names of people and who they were. Because sometimes I'd get confused by, okay, which gentry is this? Or, which Grigsby is this? And so I've started to put together kind of a encyclopedia, I guess, of these people who he would have known and been aware of and would have interacted with. So those are three that I'm kind of working on right now. And
that's remarkable. That's great.
Well,
and if folks are interested in accessing these works, at least the Spring Creek series, and I know much of your others, we've put available online on the Abraham Lincoln Association website, which is abrahamlincolnassociation.org. But I'm curious, from a publishing standpoint, have you gone to one of the more typical book publishers, or is that your plan, or do you really enjoy doing this for the masses and making it available for free for anybody, like on the ALA website, as an example?
Yeah, well, I certainly am not doing it for the money. Yeah. I mean, it's costing me money, and I'm certainly not doing it for the fame or any kind of, I guess, greater recognition. I don't want to waste my time with publishers because I think you can get consumed with a book, and that book can take over your life, basically, as far as what you're required to do. So I'm my own publisher, and I do what I think is best and get it done promptly. And then what I place them out for sale at local bookshops.
Okay.
In Springfield, and so they are for sale there. I sell them at my cost to print them from the Capital Blueprint Company in Springfield. I always put one at each of the libraries in the Presidential Library, and then the Lincoln Library in Springfield, and then UIS, University of Illinois at Springfield. That's about the extent of my reaching out. And then I really appreciate so much what you have done in terms of putting them online so that they're available to the public. That's about it on what I have done as far as publication.
If we could switch gears just a little bit to Lincoln and the wider culture, I'm curious. I know you're an astute observer of current events and culture and politics. We've seen the so-called cancel culture come from many folks, and understandably in many situations with sort of the Confederate leaders, et cetera. But there's been some concern among some Lincoln historians that Lincoln has been caught up in that unfairly. Are you concerned about that? That as we look through historic figures through our modern day lenses, that that one day will cause us to not only view Lincoln unfavorably, but for instance, calls to take down monuments or statues or that sort of thing. What's your take on that possible debate?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm a naysayer on a lot of it. The story of our Western civilization is fraught with good people and bad people, and some are a mixture of both, and most often they're a mixture of both.
Mhm.
I just heard this morning something about Winston Churchill. Well, they took his bust out of the Oval Office, and I think, well, it was because he was a colonialist in England, and the colonies that they had and the empire they had. But my God, he saved us from Nazism and Hitler, and so there's got to be a balance. And what are the alternatives? Are you saying that there cannot be any idolization of people because of the good things that they may have done, and even to the extent that you ignore the good things and say they did one bad thing and therefore change the whole judgment of that particular person? I'm not for that. I think we all have faults. I think that, yes, there should be some recognition of these Southern generals, maybe, who were pro-slavery. Obviously, that's not a good thing. But I think there comes a point where you just are overwhelmed with judgmental conclusions that lead to destructive behavior, and that's not good.
Yeah. With the larger Lincoln community, we obviously have the Abraham Lincoln Association, which you and I are both a part of. There is the Lincoln Forum, and then there is the Abraham Lincoln Institute. And those are just three. I know there are others, although I would view those three as sort of the leading Lincoln historic organizations. What's your view on having three different organizations of that type? I mean, do you feel like there should be one? And I know for some of our listeners, this may seem like inside baseball. What do I care about, the different organizations? But, I think they're important to preserve and carry on the Lincoln history. And so you want to do that in the most efficient way possible. How do you feel about having those three different organizations? Is it a good setup? Should there be some combination, or what's your take there?
No, I think it's excellent. I'm a firm believer in competition.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is somewhat competition. And then you have like the Lincoln Lore magazine, which comes out. I mean, it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And I compare that then to For the People, which is the newsletter of the Abraham Lincoln Association, or the Journal of the Abraham Lincoln Association. No, I don't. I think that the tent is huge and it can accommodate any number of organizations. Geographically, it might be. It's probably good because they perhaps are available for people who wouldn't otherwise be able to attend an event, say in Springfield, Illinois, or in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. You have different places that people can go to. So I say the more the merrier. And the more information that people can share just enlarges the possible understandings that we have of not only Lincoln, but his world and the people that lived around him, and the environment of our nation, and why was it so unique that it brought about these institutions, which I think are so valuable.
Right.
And so, no, I think I'm all in favor of multiple Lincoln organizations.
That's good. What would you say is your proudest professional accomplishment? So what do you think deserves particular attention when it comes time to pin your obituary
Oh
decades
my
from now?
gosh. Oh my. Well, I think historic preservation has really been a large part of my life. The Elijah Isles house was going to be basically let let to fall into hands that might have not taken care of it. And there was a group. I was just one of many who, at the outset, um, uh, felt that that was not something that should happen, and got together and created a corporation, not for profit, and then over a period of 20 years, we've moved it, we've restored it, we've written about it, we've had programs, and it's really become an absolutely gem of the city of Springfield. And it tells many stories that are ancillary to the Lincoln story, but they also are contributors to a better understanding of the environment that Lincoln was in.
Yeah, and I guess just for our listeners who may not know, the Elijah Isles house, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the oldest structure in Springfield.
Well, some people we have contenders who argue with us, but it's the oldest structure in its the same condition
I see.
architecturally that it was. The Springfield Art Association says that their building is older, but it's only one little section that predates it, and it's been toyed with and changed so much that it doesn't reflect its original architecture.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. I mean, I can understand, as you point out, why it's important to preserve Springfield, because it gives you a sense of the environment that Lincoln really blossomed and came into his own as an attorney, as a politician there in Springfield. Of course, I would argue that his time in Southern Indiana was just as important.
Oh my gosh.
There.
I agree.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those areas have been ignored. That's the whole thing about Thomas Lincoln and his time in Spencer County and Southern Indiana is so important.
Right. Well, Dick, I really appreciate your time. We'd like to end these podcasts where our guests offer their favorite Lincoln anecdote or Lincoln story. So I want to give you an opportunity to share your favorite one.
Oh, my favorite Lincoln story. I guess my favorite Lincoln story would be when he was campaigning for the House of Representatives, and he was running against Peter Cartwright, who was the Methodist minister, and he was out on the circuit. They were the two of them were out together campaigning, and Peter Cart got right up and stood and said, "All right, everyone here who is going to heaven, raise your hand." And so everybody in the crowd raised their hand except Mr. Lincoln. And Cartwright said, "Look at this man. He won't raise his hand. Mr. Lincoln, where are you going?" And he said, "I'm going to the House of Representatives." But that's just one of many, many stories that are of humorous stories about Lincoln. It's a short one.
Yeah. Well, Dick, I really appreciate again your time, and especially appreciate all of the tremendous work you continue to do on behalf of Lincoln Scholarship. And I can't recommend it enough for our listeners. If you're interested in Springfield, Illinois, original scholarship, Dick Hart is your man. And we've endeavored to put much of that online on the Abraham Lincoln Association website at abrahamlincolnassociation.org. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Josh, very much.
Thank you for listening to Lincoln Log. You can subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. And if you like this podcast, please consider rating it on iTunes and leaving a review. This helps other people find the show.